So here we are in a fresh new Unity project, and we can already see all sorts of stuff happening that is regarding version control. For now, let's first close the version control window and pretend that we didn't know how to access it. When we exit, it might seem that we are in a normal Unity project. The only way we could immediately tell that this is a version control workspace are those green icons at the folders here, which say private. Let's not worry about this private state for now. The only takeaway here is that the version control system is working and noticing that there are some files in our workspace. If we want to interact with version control through the Unity editor, we have two options to get to the relevant editor window. At the very top here next to the asset store, we can see an icon. This is a version of the plastic SCM icon, which opens the version control window. The other option is to go to the top bar under Window and Version Control, which does the same thing. The window we have here is technically just a plastic plugin for the Unity editor. What I mean by that is that there is literally nothing that you can do in here what you could not also do in the plastic app, whereas there is a lot of stuff that you can do in the plastic app that you cannot do here. It is useful for quickly checking your changes and a few other things without having to switch to another program all the time. But for the important stuff like merging or working with branches, you will have to use the plastic app. Let's still take a quick tour on what options we get here. The first thing you might notice is that we have a lot more changes when we initially create the project than a couple of videos ago when we connected a project to the cloud repo. This is because my Unity 6 version here has a slightly different setting. What Unity does when it creates a new project is that it doesn't really know what to do with all those initial asset-related files. Basically all the files in the asset folder. So it puts them into a state called private. We will talk about that later. Because I find it confusing to start with a ton of files right from the beginning, I want to change one setting, at least at the beginning, which will clean things up a bit. And which I would recommend you use too before you are really comfortable with version control and really know what you're doing. For that, we need to go to the top right at the version control window and click the settings icon, where we can find the actual settings under options. Here we can uncheck show private files. When we now go back, instead of having a whole list of files, we now just have one. Much better. And don't worry, those other files are not gone or something. We could still add them to version control whenever we want to. But it's just much easier to see the actual changes when we filter those files for now. Okay, but what is this actually doing for us? We can see we have 4 tabs here. By far the most important one is the first tab called Pending Changes. And you might be surprised, but it shows the pending changes. What does pending mean? Well, those are the changes compared to the last time when we saved the project, or in plastic terminology, we checked in. So let's better show this in practice. I want to change something, so I can, for example, create a new asset like a script. Or change something in the scene. Please ignore those 2 changes on the project settings for now, but beneath them you can see that our changes are recognized, and this time they don't appear with the private status, but rather as added. Again, we will talk about this status column in depth later. So in the pending changes window, we can keep track of what we changed in our project. Now you might ask, haven't we just created a brand new project? So shouldn't every single file of the Unity project be a change? Well, in theory, yes. But for convenience, Unity does the first two saves for us. And that we can see under the changeset tab. All this tab is doing is listing all the saves that happened so far. Plastic calls those changesets. In Git, those would be commits. We can see that there are already two changesets here without having ever checked in anything. Unity does this by default to allow us to focus on actual work in the editor and not worry about the initial setup. All this really is just some meta information about the packages we need and the project settings. So the changes we see in the Pending Changes tab are relative to whatever our last save or our last changeset was. And those first two changes in the settings at the top here are just coming from the fact that Plastic records the change set slightly before the Unity project is actually totally set up. So when we peek into this first change, we can see that this is basically just the project name and some cloud info that was set after the last change set was recorded. You will sometimes get slight changes in settings files on a fresh project or when the editor reloads, but those are mostly very tiny changes that you can totally ignore. Just save them with your next change set and they will not bother you anymore. Speaking of saving stuff, again, saving is not the term that Plastic uses. From now on, I will use the correct term, which is check in. And down here on the same tab, we have the option to describe what we did and check in our current changes. We now recorded a new state of our project. Or if you prefer, we created a new snapshot. So our pending changes are cleared now because compared to the state we just recorded, there are obviously no new changes. We can confirm that there indeed is a new change set when we go back to the changeset tab, where we can now see a third change set with the comment we provided. When we select it, we can also see the files we added or manipulated on the right side. And this is actually the most frequent thing that you will do in the Plastic plugin. We do have two other tabs here. For example, the second one is called Incoming Changes. Remember, version control is also about collaboration, so you might not be the only person who might change the repository. Whenever there is a new change from another workspace uploaded to the repository, it will show up here. We will see an example later in the course. Then we have the Branches tab, where we have a list of all the branches. If you don't know what those are, I promise you will very soon. We then have some fields to search and to filter for dates, and the rest of the buttons to the right are basically just shortcuts. The first one lets us refresh the workspace. Then we can reopen our Branches tab if we happen to close it, or open the real Branch Explorer in the Plastic app. The next one says something about logs, which we will look into as well. And then finally, we can invite some collaborators, which will just redirect us to the cloud dashboard. And then obviously there is a friendly reminder that we are not on the paid version. Now we know almost everything there is to know about the Plastic plugin in Unity. But obviously Plastic itself has much more to offer. So let's explore the Plastic app in the next video.